I think a few more people have to mute themselves. I hear a lot of noise. Some more people have to mute themselves.
मेरा क्या है देखो तो ठीक है.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let me start with a short anecdote or a story which will set the context for what I would like to dive deeper into. Of course, I renamed the topic a little bit, taking a little bit of interest in the topic further. I called it a 360-degree self-management. There was once a famous guru who was called to a specific location to come and address a gathering of thousands of people. He's a very, very, very expensive guru, so they had to pay a lot to get him there. He comes there and then he gets on the stage and everybody sort of respects, give the respect, and then he asks them a question. How many of you know what I'm going to speak about? And they all gave a quizzical look and they all said that we really don't know. And then the guru said that I do not want to talk to people who don't know what I'm going to talk about. And then he leaves the stage. And then these people are disappointed. They go again after a month or so. They call the guru again. But this time they have the strategy clear. They don't want to miss listening to the guru. So when they come, they know what question he's going to ask. So the guru comes and as usually asks the question, do you know what I'm going to speak about? And everybody says that, yeah, we know what you're going to speak about. So the guru says that I don't want to speak to people who already know what I'm going to speak about, and then he leaves. So the crowd is again disappointed, and now they make one more strategy, go and call the guru again. So guru comes and then he comes on the stage. Now they are very, very smart. They have devised a strategy. So the guru asks the same question, do you know what I'm going to speak about? So half of them say that we don't know, half of them say that we know. And then the guru says that those who know, please tell the people who don't know what I'm going to speak about, and then he leaves. So the question to you now is, how many of you know what I'm going to speak about? As they say, it's a catch-22 situation. Whatever answer you give, I can always escape. Anyway, jokes apart, this is a very interesting topic that I want to take you into, 360-degree self-management. I have an introspection question to start with. Take a minute or so. If you have a journal, write it down. Or if you don't have a journal, if you have a laptop, type it. Otherwise, at least just think, why is self-management essential in our life? I'll just give a minute pause for you to write down. Since it's not a physical session, we may not be able to have people presenting, but I'll share certain inputs later. But take a minute to just answer this question. Why is self-management essential? Answer to yourself, write it down. You don't need to get on the mic nor put it in the chat box. Just think.
Of course.
Okay, I hope that you had some time to reflect on this question. While there are several answers that would have come up to this question, and each answer in its own way is right. For such questions, there are no right or wrong answers. Let me share a few perspectives on why self-management is essential in our life. And then through that, let's look at what we are going to share today. The first is obviously to take control of yourself. And obviously, the question would come up, why do I have to take control of myself? If you do not take control of yourself, the possibility is that you'll be going haywire in your life. And there is no productivity that is likely to come out of your life, whether it is personal, professional, spiritual, or we just cannot remain idle. Even as they say in Gita, even Lord Krishna says that he can't remain idle even for a second. And action is something that we have to continuously keep putting into our life, and that will have to lead to productivity. And for that, self-management is essential so that your productivity becomes more focused. Second point as to why we have to take control of ourselves is, one, we have to be useful to ourselves, and we have to be useful to the world around us. Why do I have to be useful to myself? Because in the making of a man, there are certain additional inputs that God has put inside of us so that we are actually useful to ourselves and to others. leave alone the other species or creatures which are more in terms of existential mode. They just live, eat, die, and then procreate and move on. Man has much more potential compared to assuming that I give you 100 crore worth of money with you in your hand. Would you just put it in your safe somewhere inside, or would you put it in a bank, or would you put it in some way where it becomes useful to you, it multiplies, it gives money back to you in terms of return on investment, and then you use that money to help others. Man by nature is a social animal, and for him to be a social animal, he has to be useful to himself and he has to be useful to others as well. And for that, taking control of yourself and hence self management becomes essential. As I mentioned, giving back to society is something that even if you look at some of the hormones that actually secrete in our body, some of the happiness hormones are actually related to giving back to somebody else other than yourself. They have found out that this is one thing that actually makes people feel useful and make them feel happy when they're actually able to give back something to others, to be useful in the society in terms of contribution and things like that. Hence, these are the few points I thought I'll share and then start off. There are three areas where self-management becomes quite essential in each and every one of our life. There could be more areas, but all of them get classified under these three. The first is professional life, personal life. Of course, the sequence can be either way, it doesn't matter. And the third is spiritual life, where the spiritual life actually encompasses yourself and your personal life and the professional life. I mean, there is no professional life or personal life without a spiritual aspect getting into it. One of the next books that I'm writing now, which is likely to get released soon, is a book I call it a spiritual CEO. In this world where every CEO is measured only by the impact that they have in profit and loss account and balance sheets and the amount of turnover they have brought to the company, the amount of customers they brought in, specifically in the COVID times, the impact of a dimension beyond just material life has become very, very essential, at least at the top level, as they call as the CXOs. And for this, spiritual life sort of gets integrated into every aspect of a life. I want to now show you a common thread for three of them, which gets in some way knitted or woven together: the personal life, the professional life, and the spiritual life. All of them revolve around one single aspect called as goal. And hence, I have one introspective question for you. I want to leave you with a minute for that. Why do we need goals? What is the purpose? Just think about it. Write in your diary or in a notebook or a pad or on your laptop. Why do we need goals? Okay, this is a very deep question. Sometimes when I run leadership sessions, this question alone takes about half an hour to 45 minutes to answer. Let me just give you one situation. Assuming you step out of your house and then walk to the road, you go to a T junction, let's say, and then you ask somebody else, where does this road go? Showing either to the left or to the right on a T junction. What do you think is the first question they're going to ask you? In all probability, they'll be asking you, where do you want to go? Would it be all right if I just tell them, what is your problem? Tell me where the road goes. It's not going to solve, because they're going to tell you, unless you tell me where you want to go, there is no point, because every road leads to everywhere. As they say, if you don't know where you're going, any road can take you there. One of the biggest challenge that people have in their life, why they are unable to fulfill the true potential of what they are born for. If you really look at the final destination all of us would get into, it would be something called as a graveyard. Either you're burnt or buried or whatever. And normally what they put is your birth year and your death year, and there is a hyphen which comes in between. That's all. Finally, your entire life comes down to that single hyphen. X and X and X year, born, Y year, this person died. The hyphen that is in between is what we need to really express while we are alive. So that even after we are long gone, our legacy in some way, whether we leave a footprint within our family, within our street, within a small segment of the society, or in a very large playground like a spiritual organization or in a nation or in a sports arena or whatever, people have to speak about you positively, not negatively, because even Hitler and other terrorists who were slain are also spoken about. That's not something that we would all look forward to. We all need to be spoken about in terms of something that we have done which has impacted the society. If an Einstein is being remembered today, if a Babuji Maharaj is being remembered today, if Chariji is being remembered, and if Daji is going to be remembered, it's because of the positive impact they have created. And each one, knowingly or unknowingly, they had a vision and a goal which actually made them passionate about their life and made them drive towards the great achievements that they're left behind or they're going to leave behind. If you remember Einstein, because the theory of relativity brought a different paradigm which has never been seen in the field of science. You look at Babuji Maharaj, he brought spiritual research which has never been done before. I mean, even today, I don't think many people completely come to comprehend or understand the paradigm shift that Babuji Maharaj had brought about in the field of spirituality. And the same dimension that Chariji brought about or Daji is bringing about, all these happens because they had a goal or a purpose for which they're living. Without a goal, we are like a bullock tied to a cart which goes around churning the oil seeds, bringing oil. It doesn't travel anywhere. It just keeps churning and the oil comes out. And it's actually of no purpose. You, you are born, you live, you die, and that's not something. If you make a list of 50 to 100 people who you'd like to remember for the last 100 years, would your name at some point of time fit in there? Or at least have you made attempts for you to leave some kind of an imprint where people will talk about you? So and so was there. He did something. He wrote a book, or he did this, he did that, which people will remember for the positive impact leave. And hence, the need for a goal comes in. I'm just giving a very short gist of what this is all about. It brings us to the next question in this session. What all one needs to learn to get a good grip of self-management? This is an ocean by itself. I mean, self-management is something that you can grapple with throughout your life and yet have only scratched the surface. Brother Mohandas was mentioning about that 5,500 books odd which are there in Crest Library. Uh, how many of you would believe that there are close to about 4 to 5 million books which are printed and available for self-management and related kind of an area? Out of that, for whatever reason, we have only chosen say 5,500 to 6,000 books. And how many of us can say that we have read all these books? And even if you have read all these books, how many of us can say that actually you have practiced what is out there which has been shared in those books? It's not going to be possible. So we need to get certain areas at least and find out where we need to focus. I'm just giving a short list which is essential, at least from a practical point of view, which would help you in your professional, material, personal, and spiritual life. Obviously, today, if you go anywhere, many of the Connect programs that we do, the first request they always ask, specifically in corporate Connect programs, is please help us with stress management. People also ask us, please help us with time management. They ask us about, organizing skills, problem solving, having good self-confidence, assuming that you have tremendous amount of knowledge. It needs a lot of confidence for you to go stand up and speak and share what you know to a few set of people. When it comes to Connect, we get a lot of opportunities across, Heartfulness, the plethora of people who come and ask us. But unfortunately, what happens is when we tell a volunteer to go and talk about Connect, even for 5 minutes, they say that, no, brother, we'll just do the relaxation or give a sitting, but I cannot talk. So it boils down to having a lot of self-confidence, because that is something which will allow you to express yourself, not just talking, even to do something when you face situations, when you face people in life, when you face tough situations, when you face grim situations, what the world is facing due to the pandemic. You need self-confidence to survive through. People who do not have confidence will not project an image that they are worth talking to. And that will sort of put you in a shell where even if you have gems of wisdom, pearls of wisdom to share, nobody will listen to you because you don't have the confidence. Hence, that becomes essential for you, and that is part of the self-management process as well. Of course, self-confidence to a great extent is linked to communication skills. People who are extremely effective in communication skills automatically, it's sort of a introvert. If you have self-confidence, your communication skills picks up, or if you have good communication skills, your self-confidence picks up. They're sort of, in a way, sort of two sides of a coin. And of course, on top being assertive. I've seen many people who are really good, but when it comes to meeting people and talking to them, specifically many of you who are part of in material life, when you have to interact with people, you may have a point of view which you believe is right or you believe at least has to be heard. But because you are not assertive enough, because you go through as a submissive person or you become an overtly aggressive person, what happens is people either refuse to listen or they're scared of you. And hence, being assertive is one of the self-management skills that we need to pick up. We'll, from here, just branch off a little bit to find what are the building blocks of self-management? What are the key ingredients that takes self-management to be in place? Take a minute, think about it or write about it. What are the building blocks of self-management in your view? What would constitute? While there are several building blocks, there are four ingredients which are essential for us to get a good grip of what we call as self-management building blocks. First, we call it the IQ. Second, we call it the EQ. The third, we call it the SQ. And the fourth, which today is really gaining traction worldwide, what we call as a AQ. Let us dive a little bit deeper. But prior to that, I wanted to ask you a question. What do you mean by intelligence? Everybody claims to be smart, everybody claims to be intelligent, or at least they hope they want to be intelligent. What, in your view, is intelligence? Would it take a little bit of a time just to introspect on this? If possible, write down your answer. Okay, while there are several definitions that you might find for intelligence, this is something that I use in many of my sessions, which I find to be extremely practical, highly effective when it comes to ensuring that people come out of their best. Intelligence can simply be defined as doing the right thing at the right time, at the right place. Imagine the world what it is today, whether it is good, bad, ugly. It is because of people either doing the right thing or not doing the right thing, either doing it at the right time or not doing it at the right time, doing it at the right place or not doing it at the right place. For example, I need to do the right thing. I need to come up and speak, say, in a session. And today I'm speaking at Crest in a virtual seminar. At the right time, in terms of when it is actually needed, neither too soon nor too late. Even if we take our own spiritual system, it came exactly at a time when there is sort of a flux which is taking place in the world. And our masters descended to ensure that they wanted to do the right thing at the right time, at the right place. For example, if our masters had descended in Mars or in some other sort of a planet, what would have happened? They wouldn't have found the right set of souls to deal with the humans. It is said the humans are the most mature to handle a spiritual upliftment process, and that can happen only on a planet like Earth. So hence, they chose the right thing to do, they chose the right time to do, and they chose the right place to do. And hence, in whatever you do, if you really want to be seen as an intelligent person, ask yourself the question, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it within or at the right time? And am I doing it at the right place? For example, if all of you have switched off, if I face a wall and deliver this lecture, I may be doing the right thing, I may be doing it at the right time, but I may not be doing it at the right place. And hence, if you really look at the definition of intelligence and link it back to the earlier slide which I showed you on IQ, EQ, SQ, and AQ, it will make a lot of sense to you. Let's now explore the various cues that I had shared in the earlier, they were all acronyms. If you look at IQ, it's called as intelligence quotient. In intelligence quotient, we have variants right from Moron to what we call as a Mensa. What is intelligence quotient? It is nothing but a set of questions that you are asked, and how you respond to them gives you certain percentile scores. If your percentile score is way below the normal, assuming it's about 70 or 65, you are considered a moron, an absolute dud, as they would say. If you score slightly better, you may qualify yourself to be an idiot. If you score a little bit better in the league of 90 to 100, you may be called an average person. And if you score above 110, then you come into a different league of very good IQ. And there are two, three schools, but when you score beyond 130, it is said that you are considered to be of a person with super IQ. Mensa clubs, if you go and Google it, you will find out there are Mensa clubs where people who are certified to have an IQ of 130 or above alone will be allowed to register as a member. These people are considered to be of extremely high intelligence. But this was prevalent till about 30 to 40 years ago, when the world had highly intellectual people. They were really driving everything, but they found out that these people had absolutely no social skills. They were arrogant. They were really proud. They didn't know how to conduct themselves. And that laid the way in somewhat to allow the next topic, what we are seeing to come up, which is EQ or emotional quotient. We'll dive a little bit deeper into what is emotional quotient later. Till about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, emotional quotient was quite popular. A person to be successful was supposed to have both IQ and EQ in good balance. But in the last 10, 15 years, spiritual quotient is something that is gaining momentum slowly. Spiritual quotient does not necessarily mean a person who is in a spiritual path or who's meditating or whatever. It has a very, very, very wide ambit, which I'll share a bit later. And in the last 2 to 3 years, now people have come out with one more, sort of an acronym called as an AQ or adaptability quotient. They say that IQ by itself is not sufficient. EQ by itself is not sufficient. While it will give you a certain amount of success, you must have a spiritual quotient. And now they found out that a combination of IQ, EQ, and SQ leading to AQ is something which is essential for someone to really become very good at managing themselves and to get all the benefits which are associated with self-management. Let's now get into what is known as a AQ or a adaptability quotient. Adaptability quotient, as I mentioned earlier, is the trait which is picking up in the last 2 to 3 years as a leadership trait, which is expected for every leader to have. In my view, this is something which is essential, specifically in a pandemic time like this. Adaptive quotient is something like this. It is a combination of your intelligence quotient, your spiritual quotient, your emotional quotient, and then what we call as an X factor. Let me dive a little bit deeper into a different subject for you to get a feel. If you had read about the formation of species and how species have survived over generations, Earth is about 15, not about roughly 5 to 10 billion is 10 years old, 10 billion years old, compared to the life of the universe. And they found out that humans have been populating this Earth only for about 100 to 300,000 years or so, maybe a little bit longer or shorter. There have been species which have been on this planet much, much, much longer than what humans have been, and they continue to survive. If you go back a little bit and remember a famous anthropologist, a person called as Charles Darwin, he had apparently written a statement which went on to read like this: the strongest of species is not the one which is the fittest to survive, but the one which is most adaptable to change. He says that the species which will outlive everyone else will not be the strongest, it will not be the fittest, but it will be the most adaptive to change. When this session is over, note down this word. I am going to give you a word which I want you to dive deeper and study post the program. It's a word called tardigrade, spelled as Tardigrade, tardigrade. This is a name of a species which lives in the sea, which is like looks like a lump of flesh, just a few millimeter in dimension. But apparently, this tardigrade today has become the focus of attention for many scientists across the globe because of one single factor. When they had one of the payloads going to the moon, one of the species they had taken along was a tardigrade. This was like 30, 40 years ago. They had left it on the darker side of the moon and come back. In one of the subsequent visits after 30, 40 years, Moon is considered to be very, very, very hostile to living beings. And they found out that when they went back with one of the lunar probes, they found out that the tardigrade was still alive, surprisingly. And then they dived deeper to find that in a place where there is no water, there is no oxygen, there is no food, a tardigrade had lived for almost 30 to 40 years, it had not died. And then they did a little bit of a research. They found out that tardigrades can live without food for anywhere between 30 to 40 years. They can live without water and oxygen into eternity, literally. And they can withstand radiation 1,000 times more than what is permissible for a human being. They can withstand temperatures with a swing of 300 degrees centigrade, extreme cold, extreme heat. Imagine with all this, they're able to survive and come back and continue to live. And now scientists are really diving deeper to find what makes this such a small, tiny creature to be so adaptable, which humans are unable to. Even a small sneeze today literally scurries us into safety, because if somebody is going to sneeze on the road, we know what happens. He may be carrying a thread of coronavirus with him. Even a small, I mean, the entire world is literally brought down to knees thanks to a 5-gram total virus which is present all over the world. That's what they found out. The amount of virus that's available totally, if you take all the coronavirus weight, it's less than 5 grams. But it has brought 130 countries and about 730 crore population onto their knees. It is just hence not in the size. It is in your ability to adapt. Today, for us, the next few months is critical for the entire humanity. Those who pass through this before the antivirus or the vaccines come in are the people who are going to move to the next level. And they expect a huge amount of deaths and things to happen. And the people who are going to survive are those who are going to be extremely adaptable, make life modification changes, make behavioral changes, make thinking changes, make food changes, whatever changes are essential for them to adapt to the situation. And imagine, and hence this is today considered to be the most important factor for every human being. It is projected in one of the whispers, Babaji Maharaj has said that what you are seeing is only the tip of many of the bigger disasters waiting to come. And that can be overcome only if we become really adaptable for us. And adaptability is just not about the physiological adaptability. There are adaptability beyond that in terms of your mental space, your spiritual space, and all that. This is something that Babaji Maharaj has repeatedly mentioned in his whispers also. Anyway, let's now move to the next question. What do we need to ace these 4 Qs? The IQ, the EQ, the SQ, and the AQ. Let's now look at how do we ace the IQ aspect. This is today essential, at least for us to ace the exams. Even to write a, say, for example, if you're writing a competitive exam in your office, you need to have a little bit of an IQ for you to pass through. And this happens only when your knowledge expands. And in a very, very, very surprising study, they found out that the people who have superior IQ have the same amount of brain power as people who don't have that much of an IQ. And they finally found out the biggest difference to the person who has a higher IQ, which has been built up from a very young age, is one single fundamental differentiating factor. You would be surprised if I tell you what the answer is. The biggest differentiator between the people who made it really big in their IQ and people who don't make it big in their IQ is their ability to ask questions. Can you believe it? The ability to ask questions to yourself, the ability to ask questions to the world. And these are not questions which are mundane, repetitive questions. These are not questions you ask why you came up late for the class, why you didn't do homework, why you're not earning money. These are all very repetitive, existential questions. These are the people whose IQ have really expanded so fast that the questions that they asked were questions beyond the ordinary. Let me give you a very, very, very simple question for which you can keep on giving answers, which has changed in the last 5,000 years so many times. For example, is Earth flat or not? How would you prove it? Does sun rise in the east? What is water? I'm not asking what is the composition of water. I'm asking what is water? What is fire? It might be very easy for you to say that water and fire are natural elements. That is a definition of what water and fire is in terms of their attribute, but you are not still defining what is water. These are the people who ask questions like that. The famous Ramana Maharishi asked one single question which helped him to dive deeper into spirituality. What did he ask? He just asked, "Who am I?" And that allowed him to dive deep to find the true purpose of his existence. And then a huge clan of people who started following him. The same way Babaji Maharaj started asking questions inside of himself to the hierarchy, to the world. And then he started finding out answers. He found out central region, he found out the 13th point, he found out the fastest way to reach there. He refined the process of Sajmarg as was brought out by Lalaji Maharaj, introduced the elements of cleaning, introduced point A, point B, several factors. Each of the masters who have come after that have asked questions. They don't ask questions to the practitioners or to the world or to common people. They ask questions of themselves. And then the biggest of changes that happen inside of them, they pass it on to the others. In one of the first slide I was mentioning, it is your ability to help yourself before you can help others. When I expand, my knowledge expands, my consciousness expands. I am now ready to go ahead and serve the world in a bigger way, in a bigger capacity. What is the point in being of such a capability like Hanuman? And if you are not even aware that you can jump across an ocean, if Hanuman was able to jump across the ocean to serve Lord Rama, it is because somebody told him that this is what you're capable of doing. Likewise, our masters are making us to dive deeper, ask questions, introspect, pray, write diaries. Why? Because when that small spark inside of you gets ignited, you start finding yourself inside as to who you are. And when you find that answer, and then you find that the gap between you and the divinity is almost nothing. It is just a few shades of wheels, which is veils as which are stopping you from reaching there. And by the process of pranahuti, by the process of cleaning, when you reach there, when you merge with the source, imagine your potential is now on par with the potential of what the guru or master has himself. And they're happy to give it to you because that's what you are born for. You're born for true greatness. You're born for achieving the highest which is possible for every human being. And that can happen when you start asking questions, relevant questions, pertinent questions, timely questions, questions to the right people, questions on the right subject, with the right attitude. Imagine how your IQ would expand. IQ is a very vast subject. You will be able to get a lot of reading material on the net on this. Let me move to the next question, which is by itself is a ocean. EQ, which gained popularity in 1970s and 80s across the globe. A lot of work has happened. I have done a lot of studies and work on this as well. EQ in very simple term is defined as emotional quotient, and it has two dimensions, what we call as the personal awareness and the social awareness. The same thing everywhere. First, you have to find yourself who you are before you can go and share to the world. All the experiments, Babaji Maharaj did it, and then he went and shared to the world. He did it upon himself. He did it with a few disciples, very close disciples. And then it was made available to the world for them to go ahead and practice. If you have to dive deeper into EQ, first you have to be aware of yourself. How do my emotions and feelings work? What constitutes my emotions? What is my predominant emotion and feeling? Am I an angry person? Am I a sad person? Am I a happy person? Am I a gregarious person? What kind of an emotional person I am? Because how much ever IQ you have, it is your emotion which pulls you towards action. And there are people who move into karma, as they call, karmic action, only when they associate a feeling or an emotion to a specific situation. When you walk on the road, when somebody falls, if you do not have a feeling of compassion, you may not go out and act in helping that person. You may just walk off and go away out of fear, out of whatever reason, because there is no feeling or emotion for you at that point of time. Or maybe you have a feeling of fear. What if I help this person if I am put into prison, or if a police case is foisted on me? You may not go out and help. And hence, personal awareness as part of emotional quotient becomes extremely important for us to dive into. Personal awareness consists of three predominant steps. The first is called as self-awareness. Self-awareness is, to some extent, if you link it back to Ashtanga Yoga, if you look at Pratyahara and Dharana, It is nothing but stilling yourself, turning your attention inwards and looking inside to find what is my true constitution. Each one of us have a flashpoint in life. Some of us have multiple flashpoints. Self-awareness is a process through which you find what is your tipping point emotion or tipping point emotions. Which are the emotions or feelings you are strong in? Which are the emotions or feelings you are weak in? When do you explode? When do you get frustrated? When do you get anxious? In these times, if you pause, reflect, and ask questions to yourself, ask questions to the people who are very close to you, your family members, your spouse, your immediate colleagues in the office, your preceptor, your other abhyasis who are very close to you. Just ask them, what do you think makes me upset? What do you think makes me happy? What do you think makes me angry? It gives a gist of what your predominant emotions are. Why do I have to be self aware? Unless I become self aware, there is no way in which I can regulate. Please bear in mind that emotional quotient comes from the basic word emotion. Emotion stands for energy in motion. The energy that I'm talking about here is as powerful as your nuclear force itself. Because after all, if somebody dropped a bomb in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, it is because a person became emotional. He took a decision based on his emotion to drop the bomb. The bomb by itself cannot drop. It is the emotion of the feeling of the president of US at that time, I think Roosevelt, who decided to bomb to teach Japan a lesson. And that emotion of the feeling which he used, imagine the consequences that has created. It took almost 4 to 5 generations for Japanese people to get out of crippled generation. The impact of the nuclear device was so harsh on them. Imagine if you let your emotions out without channelizing them, what kind of a damage, what kind of a collateral damage that you're likely to create in yourself, in others, in the society around you, what kind of an emotional roller coaster ride that you're taking others along with you. If you just understand that, and this can only happen when you look within yourself, ask questions to others, take feedbacks. Once you find out, then you move into the second step called as self-regulation. I now understand what are my predominant emotions. I know when I get angry, when I get upset, when I get very happy. I know when I get very tipsy. There are various range of emotions, at least 150 to 200 of them. There are some excellent books available on emotional intelligence on the net. There are very good YouTube videos that you can actually go and have a look. It will give you a tremendous amount of depth on this subject. It will also share about the physiological side which causes all these emotions inside of you. Many of us are hardwired or brain wired to emote in a certain way, but all these are reprogrammable. And the reprogramming can happen only when I know for sure what my predominant emotions are. And that happens when I'm aware. And then I move into self regulation. And then when I self regulate, I use that energy as a fuel to motivate myself. I told you one of the first thing is that for the three pillars, professional, personal, and spiritual self, to really expand and work, we need to have goals. And one of the primary inputs that is essential for a person to move towards goal is for them to be motivated. And when it comes to motivation, there are two fundamental motivations you have: external motivation and internal motivation. If I have to be successful in life, I can wait for others to come and tell me that please go and do. That, in a very simple term, is called an external motivation. Somebody is pushing me to go and achieve something. But imagine if I had to be woken up every day morning, please wake up, meditate, please wake up, study, please go and exercise. What kind of a life it would be? I'm almost like a automated robot who's waiting for somebody else to turn the switch on. We are all humans. We have viveka. We know how to discriminate. If we know what our emotional buttons are, if we internalize, if I know what makes me happy, it's quite simple. I continue to do that. Copy paste, as they say. If you know, if you observe from the time you wake up in the morning and you go to bed in the night, you take a journal and write down during the day what are the times when I was extremely happy, upbeat, buoyant, highly energetic. And when you write down, say between 11 and 11:10, I was very happy today. And then ask yourself, what made me happy or very energetic during 11 and 11:10? You'll find that something would have happened around you or inside you which would have triggered that happiness or a good mood, as they say. Copy paste that, ensure externally and internally whatever made you happy and energetic is duplicated across the day. It's such a simple formula, it takes time. You need to be aware, you need to dive deeper, you need to observe, you need to be noting down points and find out. Once you do that, when you're self-motivated, in my life, at least in the last 25, 30 years, initial years, I was also in some ways sloppy, where I was expecting somebody else to push me to work. But once I understood the key of emotional intelligence, to which I got exposed about 25 years back, I understood that I cannot give the future of my achievement of goal to somebody else. Of course, dependence of guru is also from within. When you talk about self-motivation, it is not the external guru which is motivating you. It is the internal guru who is inside of you, with whom you have a continuous connect, who is motivating you all the time to become like what he is. And when I understood the self-motivation, today many people keep on asking, why do you do so many things? How do you manage to maintain that energy? Because I found out in my own way, what are the things that make me happy? What are the things that make me productive? What are the things that makes me useful to myself? I just copy paste it to the majority of the day, the same thing again and again. I'm good at doing, say, about 6 things. And these 6 things, what I'm good at makes me happy, makes me energetic. I keep only doing the 6 things. The other things, maybe once in a while I have to do, because I live in a society. I can't say no. I have to work with customers. I have to work with my colleagues. I have to work with mission functionaries. I have to work with abhyasis as part of my role. There are times I may have to do a few things, but it's like one of the bad day when you're caught in the road, when it starts raining and you don't have an umbrella or a raincoat. You take recourse in the satisfaction that when I go home, I'll get dry. And that becomes the motivation coming back home. Like that, the key activity that I do, which will make me happy, I know that even for half an hour, if I'm going to be sort of derailed in my thinking by doing something which I don't want to do, I know that I only have to do it for about half an hour. I can come back in another half an hour to do what I'm good at. And that is something which helps me to remain self-motivated. The moment you are able to find that, you have won to a great extent what I call as a war or a battle in achieving your goal, whether it's spiritual progress, whether it's the absolute merger with the divine, or material success. All that becomes literally, like a child's play once you've understood how to motivate yourself. And EQ to a great extent helps you to do that. Once you have mastered the personal awareness, you move into what is known as social awareness. And social awareness can only take place when I have empathy for others. Do I have a feeling for others' pain? Do I have a feeling for others' success? That's why our masters always speak about brotherhood. Why? Because it's not sufficient that I succeed alone. You see, look at the statement of Buddha, what he made 4,000 years ago. He said, I will be available in this universe as long as the last man is not liberated. I'll stay on. Such a great word from such a great masters of the past. The same thing is what our masters do. They can be happy just making 10 people masterly, but they're not stopping with that. They want the entire humanity. Like what Babji Maharaj said, I came from infinity, I want infinity in front of me. He wants all the people in the world to benefit from spirituality. And that comes mainly because of their extreme levels of care and compassion, what we call as empathy. When you have that, you automatically develop the associated skills which allows you to express empathy, which are called as social skills or interpersonal skills. These again come back to the fundamental points I shared earlier. Your ability to listen, your ability to communicate, your ability to be assertive, your ability to get along with the team members, your ability to lead in distress, your ability to lead a flock of people who depend on you. All these are social skills which form part of social awareness. We have seen IQ, we have seen EQ. Now let's look at one more aspect, what is called as SQ. What in your view is spiritual quotient? Just take a minute, introspect or write down what is spiritual quotient in your view, in your current understanding. Let me share today what is one of the most popular definitions of spiritual quotient, which transcends limited belief systems of religion or even spiritual systems. Because one of the challenges Charij Maharaj always used to caution that just because you are part of Sajmar, don't think that you are the only spiritual person in the world. There are people who are spiritually aligned who may not even be meditating. When I really dived deeper into that, I did a little bit of work on this. Way back in 2008, I remember when Charji Maharaj asked me to make a presentation in Crest on a topic organizational change and spirituality. I dived deeper to study the subject. At that point of time, I had come through this definition. Even today, I use it in many of my presentations. It is our ability to align our personal vision to a larger vision for the society. Many times what happens is we all have a personal vision, and that personal vision to a great extent is confined to our comfort, our material progress, or at best my spiritual progress, commencing my yatra from point one to moving on to the Pinda Pradesh, to moving on to the mind region and whatever. But if it is not aligned to the larger vision for the society, where you are working towards bringing good health, happiness, and peace to all, I may be the most advanced person. I may be already in the mind region or in the central region or whatever. But if it does not help the society in any way of bringing them good health, happiness, and peace, at a very mundane level, this is what humans want. They want to be healthy. They don't want to die early. They don't want to die of any disease which will cripple them. While they're alive, they want to at least be moving around. They want to be happy. They want to be peaceful. Anyone whose personal vision is aligned to this worldly spiritual vision is considered to be a person of a very high spiritual quotient. Many of us are actually work in progress. We meditate, we clean, we pray, we do all that. Why? At some point of time, when we have become good, when we have become better and become an instrument or a tool in the hand of our master, we are able to align our personal vision to a larger vision of the society in bringing these three values of health, peace, and happiness through the process of whatever we know. Once Charji Maharaj was asked, what do you think about other systems in spirituality? He said that everybody is contributing to the global cause in some way. Don't degrade, don't deride, don't talk in a lowly way that we are meditating, we are superior, we know what is pranahuti. All that he said is blah, blah. Nobody will respect you for that unless you have aligned yourself to a larger spiritual cause. And you will see that many of the paradigm shift that is happening in the heartfulness movement today in Daji's time is aligned toward this larger. Today we speak about wellness, we speak about happiness workshops, we speak about peace day, we speak about yoga day. Why? This is something which will make people align to a larger goal and you are considered to have an SQ. Let's imagine the potential that is likely to happen when you grow 360-degree self-management as a way of life. What is likely to happen? What does it take is rather my first question for you to unleash your 360-degree. Why do I use the word 360-degree? Because 360-degree view is like you stand in a ATC tower where you can look through that open window or the mirror on 360 degrees completely. Because you need to have a complete 360-degree view of yourself and of the world for you to unleash your few potential, or rather your true potential. Really, what does it take for you to unleash your 360-degree potential? I would rather rephrase the question. We should not look at what does it take. We have to rather look, I should be ready to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes for me to unleash my 360-degree potential by managing myself is what I have to do. There are 4 areas at least we need to have very clear clarity for us to unleash our true potential, whatever it takes. Clarity of purpose and goals. If you do not know what you are born for, if you do not know what your goal is, you may have a very sort of a disturbed view or sort of a view which is not very clear, but make it very clear to yourself. At the end of the session, if you can write yourself, you don't need to find your purpose and goal today itself. At some point of time, if you are able to find the larger purpose for which you're born and the goals that you have in life, it might be easy to say what Babaji Maharaj said, that absolute merger. It's fine, but do we really understand what that goal is? If you don't understand that goal, make a goal which is easier for you to understand. Make a purpose For example, my purpose could be to make a positive impact on all those who come across me, a positive impact across all the spectrum of people whom I impact. Clarity of purpose, clarity in thinking. Goal and purpose is not enough. I need to have very clear thinking. And thinking gets clouded due to prejudice, due to so many other baggages that we carry from the past, our inability to live in the moment. So many things distracts why we don't have a clarity in thinking. And then the clarity in the decisions that you make and the execution thereof. One of the famous definition for management today, which is being given by many management leaders, a true leader is one who is capable of taking balanced decisions and execute them ruthlessly. You should be able to take balanced decisions, which means you should not be affected by emotions. You should not be influenced by people by means beyond what is considered as a balanced decision. Because people are always out there with their hidden agenda. They'll have their personal agendas in influencing your decisions. You need to have clarity in the decisions you make. At least the major decisions. It may not be like I have a cup of tea. Even in adding 1 spoon of sugar or 2 spoons of sugar, a decision I am making. I mean, they're all very small decisions, but at least in the major decisions I make in life, I must have very clear clarity. I must make balanced decisions. Not only I make decisions, I actually get them executed. For example, at the end of the session, you may make a decision to follow all the points that I have shared. Let's assume that you do, but you do nothing about it for the next 6 months to 1 year. What is the point? Again, Brother Mohandas will arrange for a session. You will come back and then attend one more session. And then you will find that the same thing is being spoken. Again, you decide that you will do something about it and you do nothing. So there's no point in deciding something you have to do. Execution is as important as deciding itself. And the fourth factor for us to live in a world, to be harmonious, to be a person of peace, and to have happiness, I must have harmony and integration in all my relationships around, so that people accept what I say. When I want something done, even for an example, for me to brush teeth in the morning, it's not an individual activity. There should have been water in the water tank. There should be a towel next to the place where I brush teeth. So many things are there, and it is an interdependent world. Why are we talking to each other today? If you can go to the net and find all these things on yourself, why do we have a session? It is because a spoken word with certain explanation can never happen over the net. And this can happen only when I have clarity in relationships. I am helping my brothers and sisters in a common cause, for them to expand their consciousness, for them to understand what is 360-degree self-management, and help them with certain inputs and tools so that they can progress further. Whatever it takes, these 4 points are essential for you. What does it take to really attain and sustain these clarities? There are 3 key important factors that I would like to share, which will help you to attain and sustain. Attaining alone is not sufficient. For example, I climb a mountain and I just slide back to the place where I started all over again. It's of no consequence to me. I must attain and sustain. For example, I make progress by one point to the next point in a spiritual yatra. What if I climb back or slide back to the earlier point, like the Paramapadam game, that allows you to slide back? It's of no use. All that growth that I attained will go waste. There are 3 points which are essential for you to attain and sustain these 4 clarities. These are your ability to still the mind. Stilling the mind today is one of the biggest challenge for many, many, many learned people. I come across several corporate leaders. They always are bugged. They're always disturbed. When I sit and talk to them, they don't even give me eye contact. I know that something is troubling. I ask, sir or ma'am, what is happening? No, this problem is bugging me. And their mind is not in the conversation. Their heart is not in the conversation that they are having with me. Their mind is elsewhere. The conversation is elsewhere. It's of no consequence. Even when you are attending the session, the last 50 minutes, how many times your body and mind were together? Your body would have been in front of the computer system or your laptop or your iPhone or your other phone through which you are watching this program. But how many times did your mind wander away somewhere? Oh my God, my cooker whistle is going up. Or at 1 o'clock, I have a call with my boss and things like that. how many times your mind wandered and came back? There is a famous story of a guru who was teaching a disciple how to meditate. And the meditation session started, and the disciple kept his eyes closed. And the guru kept on beating him on the back at least 10, 15 times. After 10 minutes, the disciple opened his eyes and he asked, Guru, I am meditating. Why are you beating me up? At the time, the guru says, you are not meditating. Your mind is in the vegetable market to buy vegetables for today's evening meal. His mind was not still, it was running around. There's a famous story that Daji gave, I'll teach you how to fly, come to the mountain in the night, but you should not think of monkeys. And the person, what happened? He was only thinking of monkeys. Extremely difficult to still the mind. Stilling the mind is essential for you to get the clarity. After you still the mind, you can turn to the heart. This is something that we all know, or we think we know, turning to the heart, because heart has its own brain, is something scientific community is slowly finding out, which our spiritual giants of the past had found out long ago. It may not be a physical brain, but it has its own way of brain. It has its own way of thinking to tell you what is right and what is wrong. For these two to happen, you have to learn to listen, to listen, to listen. In many of my corporate engagements, when I lead sessions in classroom, when I speak to executives, when it comes to a session where they all have to confide their problem, one of the top 3 problems they always share with me is my boss does not listen to me. I have so many ideas. I have so many inputs. I have so many solutions which will make the company better. My boss just does not listen. Lack of listening is one of the biggest challenges today in every part of the world. You ask the son or the daughter, he'll say, my parents don't listen. You ask the parents, they say, my children don't listen. Children, parents say that the school or college doesn't listen. This is the biggest challenge. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can speak less and listen more. Ideally, when I'm not in a classroom taking session, very rarely I speak, because I would like to listen to find out what are the perspectives available from all the people outside of me and the person who is inside of me as well. That's why listening has both the aspects of both outside and inside. I'm going to one of the last slides of the day before I wind up and throw it open for question and answer. There are several tools available in front of us. I do not want to give any answers at this point of time. You know it better. Many of you have been meditating for at least an year or more in this system. Some of you may be meditating for a long time. You all have worldly experience. You all are literate enough where you have gone to school, college, you have read a lot, you would have read a lot of books, you watched a lot of shows. There is a lot of knowledge abundantly available to you already, plus whatever I've shared a little bit today. The tools that are available, I do not want to spell it out directly to say these are the only tools available for you to develop all those that has been shared in the earlier slides. I will just say that you know it better and then take you to question answers. Brother Mohandas, I am done with the first round of the session. I took exactly 55 minutes. Now we are open for question answer in case people want.
Again, you can put your questions into the chat box and we will ask the question directly to brother. I think now for the questions, introspection is going on.
Yeah, we'll give them a little bit of time. Moshe.
Okay. What are the techniques to still the mind?
This is something that I think our masters have answered so many times. At least being with the 2 masters of heartfulness meditation has taught me a lot. The biggest way to still the mind, there are 2 things that I would really share, which I've shared across all leadership spectrums in all classroom sessions, which I'm still a work in progress, but I practice. The first is to suspend prejudice. You cannot still the mind till you have suspended prejudice. And prejudice is something that is integral part of our physiological system and DNA. For example, the moment I appear on the camera in front of them, those who know me would have started looking at me differently. Those who hadn't known me would have started looking at me differently and started sizing me. What is he going to talk? What is the new that he's going to talk? What is that he's going to tell something that I haven't known? Oh, this person looks black, he must be so and so. This person looks like from this community, he looks so and so. Maybe this person is learned, he must know something. We all jump, and this is a very good exercise, mental exercise we all do. Keep our mental faculties busy by judging everybody else all the time. Till we suspend prejudice, which is extremely difficult. I'm not saying it's easy at all. With our upbringing, we tend to jump into judgments very fast. Once you suspend prejudice, the second comes when you live in that moment. And some scientists have measured saying a moment lasts less than 1 second. They say that it lasts a few microseconds at best. While I'm talking, if somebody is already thinking about the tea break they're going to get 10 minutes from now, they're already not in the moment. Once somebody asked me in a classroom, have how do I, how do I be in the moment? I told them, ask this one single question for you to know to be in the moment. Ask yourself, what is the biggest problem at this moment? If the participants can ask themselves, what is the biggest problem at this moment you are in front of this session? You cannot say, for example, I am hungry, or that's going to be 10 minutes from now, or evening 1 o'clock I have a session, or yesterday somebody spoke like me. These are all already either in the past or in the future. At best, at this moment, I can say, I have been sitting for 1 hour, I have a small pain in my back, I feel thirsty. Animals, Charji Maharaj always used to say, know how to live in the moment. They are not worried about tomorrow. They don't look at how am I going to get my meal day after tomorrow. They take the meal. Even if you look at the National Geographic serials, you will find that the moment a lion has its meal, the deer will be walking very closely nearby because they know that the lion has had its meal, it will not attack, because lion is not something which looks at day after tomorrow. Oh my God, this meal I had in my stomach will last only 3 hours. Let me keep this, tie this deer up so that I can eat it later. No, it just lives in that moment. This is something humans have the biggest challenge because they're always worried either about the past or the future. They're looking for a moment which will happen 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, 10 years from now. All of us, once Daji mentioned, none of us ever know how to build up wealth because we always build up wealth which finally our children and grandchildren will use, and we live in utter poverty. If we really know how to live, where the day you die, your bank balance should be zero. You should not have a house. You should have sold it off because you know when you're going to die. These are the two things that are essential to still the mind: suspend prejudice and being in the moment.
So there is a next question, which is, can we become more self-aware and self-disciplined towards the life with these quotient training?
I think somebody has some serious relationship issues at home. I heard it as wife. Am I right? They said wife.
No.
Life.
Life, Life.
Life. Okay, fine. Unless you are self-aware, how can you be? I mean, what is life? Let's put it this way. I am alive today. Say tomorrow I died. Does life or the people in the world make any difference to me? Not at all. And the people around me to a great extent are nothing but a reflection of what I am. 3 days back, there's a very interesting story which was floating around in WhatsApp. Some of you might have read it. There's a husband and wife couple who are living in a flat in a third floor, and they're looking through a open plot which is nearby where there are some very poor people living. Every day, the wife says that their clothes are very dirty. Why do they keep wearing dirty clothes? After 3 days, the husband silently cleans the window. And then she comes out and says, lovely, the dresses are so pure and white today. The husband smiles and says, all I did is I just cleaned that window, that's all. Many times the window through which we look at others is always tinted with various colors, tainted with dust. And that can only be removed when I look at myself. How many of us have the guts to face ourselves and ask uncomfortable questions? What kind of a beast I am? Am I the divine human being that my master wants me to become? If I have not become, how do I become? The more I scrub myself and make myself a better mirror, the image that I reflect on this mirror starts getting better and better. And the best way to look at life is to make yourself look at yourself. That's what I said in my first slide also. Make yourself better before you start looking at others, because they are all a reflection of what you are. When you get angry with somebody, it's because there is a portion in yourself which is still making you angry to that situation. When that goes, the anger also goes out. It's something like that.
Okay, there is two questions I think looks alike. What is the X factor in AQ?
Very good. I was waiting for someone to ask that. I deliberately did not dive deeper. After a lot of research, they have found out there are about 30 to 40 factors which constitute the X factor. But out of that, 80% weightage they are given to a three-letter word called as ego. They found out that the inability for a person or an ability for a person to adapt is based on how flexible they are with their egos. So ego has its plus points, ego has its minus points. Without ego, we cannot survive. And ego is what actually creates the downfall and the challenges for us as well. Adaptability quotient today is my ability or inability to tune my ego to work with all those around me and with myself. So the biggest X factor actually in adaptability quotient, people are still researching on it, but the biggest X factor is as of now what people say is ego.
Thank you, brother. Next question is how to copy paste the happy moments to practical life.
Okay, quite simple. While you are in the last 1 hour, did something make you happy in my presentation for the last 1 hour? For example, it could have been the way I presented, or something which I said which made you happy, or something which triggered something in you which made you think of an event or something which made you happy. Go back to that moment and find out what triggered that happiness inside of you. Was it an event? Was it an action? Was it a thinking? Was it a gesture? Was it a kind word? What is that which made you happy? And find a way to duplicate it across the day whenever possible, because it's like a wave. It's like, a wave which keeps going. There is a crest, there is a trough. The crest is where our peak of the emotion is. And scientists have found out in a day we have about 6 to 8 crests, which you write for every day. We have a crest for 5 minutes, 6 to 8 times. It's about 30 to 40 minutes is when we are naturally happy. And ask people around you in the last 1 month, if it's my spouse or my parents or my colleagues, I ask them, when did you find me to be happy? They'll say that when you are gardening, you are happy, or when you are cooking, you are happy, or when you are meditating, apparently you looked happy, or when you spoke to your colleagues or you gave them advice, you are happy. Maybe you're a person who likes to give advice. And when people listen to your advice, makes you happy because it boosts your ego. Copy that, repeat it throughout the day so that the entire day becomes crest without troughs. It's a possibility, but you have to make a beginning somewhere.
Next question is with lots of enthusiasm we start, but to sustain it, any inputs, how do we keep fueling that engine? Yes, internalize the goal, any additional inputs?
The first word in the question has an answer that they wanted it. You might have remembered one of the books that Charji Maharaj wrote. He explains the word enthusiasm comes from a Greek word called entheos, which means to put the God within.
Exactly.
The moment the divinity is already ingrained in you, I talked about self-motivation. I spoke about that the only motivation that works is intrinsic motivation, where you already know how to motivate yourself. And the highest level of motivation is doing something which in some way will enable me to be the best version of myself, which will make the God or the master inside of me happy. Before doing anything, just ask yourself, will it make my master happy? Will it make my guru happy? Will it make my God happy? If that is too much to ask, just ask, will it make me happy? Will it make the people around me happy? Make a beginning there. And if that happens, enthusiasm is supposed to maintain throughout the day.
I think next, I think whether it is a question or an answer, I cannot make out. But anyway, ego to humility.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Ego to humility.
Yeah. That is a famous acronym that you might have found out. Ego is an acronym, somebody say, which edges your God or Guru out. Edges Guru out. Edges God out. In your heart, you have space only for one. That's why Kabir famously said that the lane of lovers is so narrow that one can walk at a time, which means the other person has to get into the other person's heart. The moment you know that the God inside you is far more greater, the Guru inside you is far more greater than you have nothing but to be humble. To be humble, just ask yourself, can there something that you can do without the help of anybody in life? Absolute zero. There's nothing in this world. For you to be born, you needed your parents to come together. For you to be delivered into this world, you had a doctor and maybe a nurse to help you out. For you to grow, you needed your mother to provide you breast milk. You needed the society to give you the space for you to play and grow and nourish yourself. There is nothing in this world that I can do myself. Is one of the biggest farce in the world is when someone says that I made myself, I'm a self-made man. The moment you understand that everything that I have made upon myself, once Charity and Daji also mentioned, what are you really talking about? Whatever you have become is because of your samskar. Don't claim credit. The same thing what Lord Krishna said to Arjun. Don't think you are killing Karna. I have already killed him. Just throw the arrow. So our entire humility exercise starts from the understanding that we have only karma for us to perform, or shama as Babaji would say. That's the only thing that is left to us. The result is not in my hands. The result is in the Lord Himself, the Guru Himself. The more I understand, the more humble I become. The more humble I become, my ego surrenders to the higher power which is inside of me. The problem is solved. But it is a very difficult and treacherous path, not easy.
Next question is, desires also make us happy, but they could create a problem in our spiritual journey. Do we differentiate happiness?
Babaji Maharaj had once famously said, a truly happy person is one who is happy under all circumstances. Once Daji in his talk 3 years ago in one of the Bandaras mentioned, people always blame samskaras for lack of happiness or whatever. And then he went on to give an example. Say, assuming you're born in the year 1975 or 1980, when the time you are born with certain samskaras. He mentioned that normally when you follow a spiritual path, when your samskara is burnt out through bhog and by cleaning, less than 10, 20 years, you burn off all the samskaras. In 1990, for example, did you know that a phone called iPhone is going to come out in 2000? Wouldn't have known. So when you saw that phone in 2001 or 2002 or 2010, what actually made you develop the interest in that product that I want to buy it? Is it your samskara? Absolutely not. It is your desire. And if you look at desire, where does it come from? It comes from your wish. Where does the wish come from? It comes from your thought. How does thought come from? It is something that auto generates in yourself. So, what is the solution to that? If I am in meditative state continuously, whatever thoughts which emerge out of me cannot have any impact other than what the Guru wants of me. True constant remembrance or meditative state is when you don't become thoughtless. You become in a situation where your thoughts are regulated by Him, and your complete surrender ensures that you don't develop anything on your own. He puts a wish, He puts a desire in you, which is essential for you to go through this life. A time comes in a sadhak's life when you are done with all the samskaras, and then the Guru starts giving a few so that you are able to sustain this body till the goal is achieved. Hence, to great extent, be careful of the thoughts that you choose to expand upon. Finally, it's our thinking which becomes a wish, which becomes a desire, which becomes an impression, which becomes a deep samskara. It's finally up to us with the help of the Guru. You have to unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
Still in mind and listen to heart. Is it one and the same thing?
Take them as two sides of a coin, because we understand that there are two instruments we have when we sit in meditation. The biggest instrument is the mind itself. Until the mind in some way stills by itself, the heart doesn't take over, or allow the heart to take over to such an extent that it two sides of a stick. The famous talk that Chariji gave in Malaysia. They are like two ends of a stick which have to compass and encompass where they become together, where the mind and the heart works in unison. Through meditative practice over a period of time, there's something that automatically develops. We have another 3 minutes, I think. So
I think last one is, I think it's more of appreciating that particular question answer. What makes my master happy? Very beautiful. I think.
There are several answers that have been given right from Lalaji's time to Daji's time. One answer is, whatever you do, just think for yourself, will this, you see, there is one macro goal, there is one micro goal. The macro goal is to make my master eternally happy. The micro goal is through the micro actions and thoughts that I do. If the master is inside of me, if every thought and action which comes out of me, would it make him happy? For example, I'm going to talk to somebody right now. Will the words that I share with that person, will it make my master happy? If the master is speaking through me, will it make him happy? It's as simple as that. The eternal happiness of a disciple being accepted fully by the master happens only at the time of merger. So let's not worry about that. Let's look at every small action that we do. Just put that one single question in front of you. What I'm going to say, what I'm going to think, what I'm going to do, will it make my master happy? If it is so, go ahead. Otherwise, revisit that action or thought or deed. Maybe something better will emerge.
So that's wonderful, brother. Thank you very much for sharing all those ideas, your experiences, and mainly the point which you have brought out with the concept of IQ, EQ, SQ, and AQ. Because even for me, I think this is the adaptability quotient. The first time I'm hearing it, so it's wonderful to listen to something new every time, and at the same time, I think there are many aspects in a very subtle way. You have opened it and made us to introspect and understand certain things in a more better sense. So mainly the concept of larger purpose in life, that is which we have to really look for, and concept of service that you have emphasized, where you mentioned about the happiness is not just by means of keeping ourselves satisfied as such, and this X factor which you have mentioned it very clearly. So on behalf of the whole team at Crest as well as the participants over here, so we thank you very much for your precious time, and we will definitely call you again and again for this kind of sessions, because we are lined up. This is the third one which we are having, virtual training program 3, and we have already completed virtual library exploration program 1. So one more which we are going to come up with within another 2 weeks time. So we will have continuous these kind of programs often. So thank you, brother. Thank you, brother Prakash, for sharing all your wisdom.
It has been my pleasure too. After all, we are all part of the family. Whatever I can do, I have done, and I hope that the participants have something to take away for them to go back and practice. I wish them the very best in their pursuit of the ultimate spiritual goal for which we have taken birth. And I pray to Master and the hierarchy